I unfortunately had to move back with my family after my most recent breakup. He and I were living in Boston together in an apartment we got. Just a little word of advice: never sign a lease with someone who you recently got into a relationship with. He was not the person I thought he was. My parents live in Western Massachusetts. If you've ever been to Massachusetts, you'd know the more west you get, typically the more rural it gets. I'm not a big country girl. I like to be in or near a major city, especially since I'm in my 20s still. My parents' area is super boring. I'm hoping I'm only here temporarily until I find another apartment I can afford myself, though I'll be staying away from Boston for reasons. I had to get a job back at the urgent care facility I used to work at before I moved. They welcomed me back excitedly, even if it is just temporarily until I move again. The trade-off with this job, though, is that I tend to work undesirable hours, meaning overnights. Though the shifts are easy, they're boring, and they entirely mess up my sleep schedule and social life. Not that social life is even the best around here. After my shifts, sometimes I'll stop for what's considered my dinner, usually takeout since not much is open at these hours. Though this morning, I got out at 4 a.m., and there's a bagel place that opens at that time, and they serve a lot of types of food. So I stopped by there and grabbed a chicken sandwich and a salad. I was going to eat it once I got home. I also had to make a pit stop for gas as well. I stopped at the local Shell station, one of the few gas stations open at this hour that was on the way home. The parking lot for this station is huge, and yet I hardly ever see any other cars in there, even during the day. I went inside to pay cash to save a little money. I went back outside to the pump, and there was now another car at one of the other pumps. It was a blue sedan. A guy got out of the car as I was walking over to the pump I was at. As I began fueling, I noticed him start to fuel up as well. I guess he locked the handle in place so that it would automatically keep dispensing gas without him holding it, because he walked through the two pumps to my side and then said to me, "Want to see a funny trick?" I immediately hated this interaction. Still, for some reason, I said, "What's the trick?" He then started doing that stupid old trick where you pretend you're pulling your finger off with your other hand by just folding it down. He kept looking down at his hands and then back at me with this kind of sarcastic looking expression, as if he knew what he was doing was stupid, but honestly I couldn't tell. I fake laughed so that he'd go away, but he didn't stop. He kept doing the trick even after I looked away and tried my best to pretend not to notice anymore. When I felt the click of the gas nozzle indicating that the tank was full, I was so relieved. I quickly relatched the nozzle to the pump and hurried inside for my change. When I came back outside, the man wasn't in sight anymore, yet his car was still there, and the hose was still pumping gas into his car. I didn't want to stick around to catch his attention again. I got back in my car, though just out of paranoia, I checked the back seats just to make sure he wasn't hiding back there. I locked the doors, and then I was back on the road. I was home in about 5 minutes after that. I was so excited to eat my 4:30 a.m. dinner. I picked up the spare from my parents' hiding spot, unlocked the door, and then quickly hid it back in its hiding spot. I locked the door once I entered, as I always do. I went straight to the kitchen to eat. I make sure to be quiet when I get home late so as not to wake up my parents. We only have 2 cars in the family, so I share my mom's car. I didn't need a car in Boston anyway, but since I moved back, I had just been using the hidden spare key they would hide in the front to let myself in. As I was at the table eating, I heard the front door being unlocked and then opening and closing. I stopped chewing and froze to listen. With a mouth full of food, I said, "Mom? Dad?" No answer. I didn't hear any footsteps or anything. I hurried out of the kitchen to take a peek in the foyer. No one was in there. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I ran up the stairs to my parents' room and barged in. I was horrified to see both my parents in bed, and they were both awoken to my very forceful opening of the door. I said very quietly but in a clear panic that someone just came inside the house. My dad jumped out of bed and hurried downstairs. I cautiously followed behind him. He turned on all the lights of every room we passed, then he went out front to check for the spare key, and it was missing. My mom and I were absolutely horrified, yet my mom still found the time to lecture me for not checking my surroundings before re-hiding the key. My dad began searching every room in the house, and we followed. When he was done checking my older brother's room, He left to continue searching and left the lights on in here. I stayed behind in this room and decided to check a couple of the spots that I felt my dad had missed, because I know internally I didn't expect to find anyone. I checked under the bed and then I checked the closets. Nothing. So I went downstairs to the main floor. It seemed my dad was already checking the basement. I was honestly horrified to go into the basement right now, even with my dad down there. So I stayed on the middle floor with my mom. But curiosity still got me, and I went to the dining room, which is adjacent to the foyer by the front door. I got down on my knees and looked under the table, and there he was. It truly did not feel real. There was that man from the gas station, hiding under the dining room table. I recognized him instantly. I screamed as loud as I could, and in response, my mom started to scream too. My 65-year-old dad came up the stairs as fast as he could, ready to fight this intruder. The man came out from under the table and began fending off my dad, who is at least 20 years his senior. And as my mom and I saw him overpowering my dad, we began doing whatever we could as well, hitting and punching at the man as my dad still held on to him. It was when all three of us were attacking him that he finally decided to retreat and fled through the front door. This was when we called the cops, and thank God for a quick response time. However, that man still had the key to the front door. That night, the police left a police car parked in our driveway to deter that man from coming back. My dad wedged a chair in front of the front door as well and slept in the living room. The next day, he switched out the lock to the front door, and with that, my parents' days of hiding a key outside were over. I do feel guilty for bringing that dangerous man to my parents' house, and it was definitely on me for being careless. But honestly, I think that man followed me with his headlights off, because I didn't see any cars behind me the entire ride home. I'm happy for my and my family's safety though. However, this just made me want to move out of here even more. I like driving at night because there's nothing more that I hate than driving in traffic. I'm from New York, Long Island specifically, and the traffic here is truly unbearable. My brother lives in Florida, and I like to go down and visit pretty often. It's a long drive though. Depending on when you leave, it could be upwards of 18 hours. I like to leave New York very early in the morning, like 2 a.m., so that I could be out of all the high traffic areas by the time any cars are on the road. So it was a Thursday morning at 2 a.m. that I was leaving home to get on the road. I stopped for my morning coffee at Dunkin' Donuts, knowing I had a long, grueling drive ahead of me. The reason I was driving and not flying was because I was going to be down there for a whole month, and I didn't want to rely on my brother to take me everywhere I needed to go. By the time I was off of Long Island, it was after 3 a.m. It was smooth sailing from Jersey. The drive from New York to Florida is very easy once you're out of New York. You take the I-95 all the way down. At about 4 a.m., the hunger was starting to set in, and so I pulled off the I-95 at the first sight of a food sign. I saw a Wendy's on the sign, and so I figured I'd get breakfast from there. I skipped breakfast at the house because waking up so early, I feel like your brain doesn't have a chance to realize how hungry you are for a few hours. At least that's me personally. I followed the signs to the Wendy's. I was in some random spot in Jersey. There were no streetlights here. I felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. Just about the only light was from my headlights. When I got to the Wendy's parking lot, some of the lights were on, and I saw a car in the parking lot, so I pulled into the drive-thru. The menu in the drive-thru was lit up, so I thought it was open, but I sat there for over a minute looking at the intercom, waiting for someone to greet me, but they didn't. I even said excuse me to no avail. I pulled out my phone and looked up this Wendy's, and wouldn't you know it, it didn't open until 6 a.m. And then, suddenly, 3 knocks at my window almost sent me out of my seat. I turned to my right, and there was a man outside my window, smiling. He motioned for me to lower the window. I didn't really feel comfortable doing that, so I just cracked it open just enough to hear him. He said the place isn't open, and I said, yeah, I actually just found that out. He then told me that he was stranded. He pointed to the one other car in the parking lot over there, and said his battery died. He practically begged me to come help him jumpstart his car. I told him I don't have jumper cables, and he told me not to worry, he has them in his trunk. I took one more look at his car parked in the corner spot by the woods, and I said okay. I believe in karma, and I knew I'd have bad karma if I left this man stranded in a situation that I could have easily helped him out in. He backed away from the car so I could pull my car next to his. Since he was parked head in, I did the same to align our hoods as close as possible. I got out from my car after popping my hood. He went to go pop his hood and grab his jumper cables. After we connected the cables to the respective terminals, I started my car again. We gave it a minute before I told him he should go try starting his car. He took his sweet time walking inside, but when he tried starting it, the car didn't start. So we gave it another couple of minutes, and then he tried it again. Still nothing. This was weird considering he had just been driving the car, so his battery shouldn't need that long to get enough of a charge to start again. The guy then asked me to hang on as he walked away and got on his phone. He started speaking in Spanish in a pretty low volume. I can't really understand Spanish, so I wasn't even bothering trying to hear what he was saying. He came back to me after his call and said that his friend said to give it a few more minutes and try one more time. I said okay. I was trying to do the right thing, but I was also hoping this wasn't going to eat up much more of my time. But the last thing I was expecting was hearing the aggressive sound of 2 pickup truck engines flooring it into the parking lot, one from either side of the building. I instantly put it together. I said oh shit under my breath as I removed the jumper cables from my battery and shut the hood in a hurry, but it was too late. The 2 trucks pulled up behind my car, trapping me in. I had to think on my feet. I looked at the man, who was still smiling at me, but now the smile looked and felt much more nefarious and evil. The look he gave me was so unsettling, and it's engraved into my memory. I locked my car with my key fob and darted into the woods. I ran in the dark, cutting up my shins and God knows what. I tripped over something on the ground, and at that point, I took that as the time to lay down and make myself as tiny as possible. I heard a few men yelling in Spanish somewhere in the woods. I was so scared for my life as the voices got closer. I don't think it gets any more tense than what I was experiencing in that moment. I didn't know how many there were, I didn't know if they were armed, but I heard at least 3 voices. And then the voices started fading away back into the distance, and I felt a sense of relief, until the sound of my car alarm going off in the distance. All of my stuff was packed in the back of my car. Hundreds of dollars worth of clothes, shoes, watches, bracelets. I started making my way back to the parking lot, crouching down. By the time I got close enough to look into the lot, I could see it was just my car there. All 3 other vehicles were gone. I ran out to my car, and it was anyone's worst nightmare. My rear window was shattered, and all of my stuff was gone. Basically 80% of my entire wardrobe, just stolen. My suitcase in the trunk, and all the bags in the back seats. Everything. I actually started to shed tears out of pure stress. I called the police and explained everything. The officers on scene told me they would have to get the CCTV footage from the Wendy's when they opened. After taking all of my info, I was told I didn't need to stay in town and they would be in touch. I was about 2 hours from home. I turned around and drove home. It was the most stressful, depressing, and defeated drive of my life. To make matters worse, I was contacted by the police department in Jersey, and they told me the vehicle in the Wendy's lot had a fake license plate, and the 2 pickup trucks didn't have plates. He told me they were still going to do what they can, but I knew that was just him trying to give me a sense of hope. My stuff was never found. Those bastards got away with it. Like I said, I believe in karma, and I hope those pieces of filth got what was coming to them. We've all taken a long car trip, haven't we? We've all passed that rest area sign multiple times, wondering if we could make it another 20 minutes or not before having to take a pee break or stretch. Sometimes you're lucky and get one of those huge rest areas with the big buildings with food and everything. But most other times, depending on where you are, you'll be lucky to get a little one with a tiny building just for restrooms and nothing else. Well, I was on a long road trip. A 15-hour road trip, actually. And a big chunk of that drive was overnight. I won't say from where to where because I don't really think that matters much. But I will say that I was in some bumfucky area on the east coast of the US. It was late at night and I was powering through the drive. Not many cars on the road at this hour. In fact, it was a pretty rare scene to see another car on the road this late. I was reaching that uncomfortable point in the ride where I had to use the bathroom, and I was just getting overall antsy in my seat from sitting for so long. I started keeping an eye out for a rest area sign, and when I saw that familiar blue sign, it felt like a saving grace. So a few miles later, I veered off into the rest area. It was a small one, but there was a restroom building, and that's all I needed. There were no trucks parked here. I'm pretty sure they could only stay overnight at designated truck rest areas. But there was another car in the parking lot. I considered the possibility that whoever it was asleep in their car. As I got out from my car, I stretched a bit, and on my way to the bathroom, I looked at the other car in the lot. But the windows appeared to be tinted, so I couldn't see if someone was inside of it or not. Not that it was a big deal in the moment, I was just curious. I got inside the bathroom, and I was faced with a strange sight. There was a man standing in the corner of the bathroom with his head looking down and his back towards me. At first I thought he was using the urinal, but I quickly realized he wasn't even facing the closest urinal. He was literally just facing the corner of the wall. I paused, and I didn't know whether to say something or not. I almost said, "Are you all right?" but the scene was just too weird. I had to walk closer to him though to get to the stall, and honestly, I was almost scared to get near him. I just tried to mind my business and keep a normal pace. I walked into the stall and closed the door. Honestly though, I couldn't go to the bathroom with someone else in the room. I'm one of those people. It was just too dead silent in there. It was weird. I stood in the stall for like a minute trying to at least pee, but I couldn't for some reason. I flushed the toilet anyway and left the stall. But now, the man had turned around. He was still standing in the same spot, but now he was facing me. I could see his face, and he was looking at me. I'm not one to ever judge someone's appearance, but this man was the scariest looking man I'd ever seen. There was something so unsettling about his face, specifically his eye region. The expression he had was a blank stare. I hadn't had a social interaction in over 10 hours, and this caught me way off guard. Instead of saying anything, I quickly turned and headed out of the bathroom. I got to my car and wasted no time turning it on and backing it up. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw that man walking in the direction of my car. I drove fast away to get him out of my sight. I was relieved to get back on the highway. However, that was the only relief I got. I still had to use the bathroom. I was sure it would only be another 20 minutes or so till the next one. I could hold it. I was right, it was about 20 minutes before I got to the next rest area. It was another nearly identical one as the other. Like I said earlier, most are pretty similar. No cars were in this one, thank God. I pulled into a spot right in front of the bathroom and hurried to the stall, and let's just say I felt a lot better very quickly. As I was finishing up in the stall, I heard footsteps enter the room. I thought they'd stop at one of the urinals, but the footsteps came straight to the stall and stopped. I saw someone's shoes through the bottom crack of the door. They were literally standing on the other side of the stall. My first thought was that it was that guy from the other bathroom. He followed me. My social anxiety was handicapping me from saying anything initially, until I finally mustered up the courage to say, "Someone's in here." No response to this though. Now I knew I was in trouble. The only thing I could do was dial 911, put it on speaker so that the man could hear the operator say, "911, what's your emergency?" I said loud and clear, "I'm being followed by a dangerous man. I feel threatened." As the operator asked my location and details, I answered everything in a loud voice, in a tone suggesting that I was implying a "f*** you" to the man. Thank God this worked, as the person turned and walked out of the bathroom. I told this to the operator, but said I still would feel safer waiting in here until police came, and that's what I did. A knock at the bathroom door from a police officer was my cue to safely come out. I described the man and the vehicle I saw at the other rest area, the creepy encounter, and then the second creepy encounter at this one. We checked my car as well to make sure it wasn't messed with at all. After determining that he was gone, the officer and I left the rest area at the same time, and eventually he turned off the highway. The rest of my road trip went normal, but damn was this a terrifying night. I'd never been followed before. I know with almost 100% certainty that the person outside of the stall was the same creep that was in the first bathroom. It just feels extra weird because I'm a male. These things I feel like usually seem to happen to women, but I guess it can really happen to anyone.
It was a long drive on the highway, and the silence of the night made it even longer. My mom, exhausted from the day, was fast asleep beside me. The dim glow of the dashboard lights cast a soft hue on her face, and I could see the lines of fatigue etched deeply. She had been up since early morning, packing our stuff and making sure everything was ready for our trip. We had to leave right after I got home from school on Friday because my uncle had invited us for a camping trip the next day. We wanted to beat the weekend traffic, which meant hitting the road as soon as possible. Our destination was my uncle's house in the neighboring state, a good 6-hour drive away. We aimed to arrive before midnight to catch some rest before setting off on our camping adventure. As I drove through the night, the hum of the tires on the asphalt was almost hypnotic. The occasional headlights from passing cars broke the monotony, but mostly it was just us and the open road. The hours dragged on, and fatigue began to set in. I glanced at the clock. It was already past 11 p.m., and we still had about an hour and a half to go. My eyes felt heavy, and I knew I needed a break. The last thing I wanted was to doze off behind the wheel. I decided it was time to pull over at the next rest stop. I gently shook my mom awake and thought she was reluctant. She agreed that a short break would be wise. Plus, I really needed to use the restroom. The night air was cold and crisp when I stepped out of the car. The rest stop was eerily quiet, with only a few trucks and cars parked around. It felt like we were the only ones awake at this hour. The rest stop itself was quite large, but it had a humble appearance. The parking lot was well lit, but the restroom building was situated a bit farther away from where we parked. My mom, still groggy, decided to stay in the car while I went inside. She told me to hurry. I nodded, making my way towards the restroom. The path was dimly lit. I could feel the chill in the air seeping through my jacket. Despite the cold, I was grateful for the brief respite from driving. Little did I know, the next few minutes would be some of the most terrifying of my life. As I approached the restroom, the sense of unease only grew. The building itself was poorly maintained. The lights inside were dim, with some flickering occasionally, casting an ominous glow on the tiled floor. Water spots, soap scum, and smudges marred the mirrors, adding to the rundown look. I had hoped for a quick and clean stop, but this restroom was far from inviting. I chose a stall at random, trying to ignore the general state of disrepair. The door creaked loudly as I closed it, the sound echoing through the empty restroom. I took care of my business quickly, eager to get back to the relative safety of the car. However, just as I was about to flush, a strange sound caught my attention. It was faint at first, almost like a rustling or dragging noise coming from the outside. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, trying to make sense of it. It sounded like something or someone was being dragged across the ground. The noise grew louder, and I could hear muffled voices. Panic began to rise within me as I strained to listen. The voices were low and urgent, and I couldn't make out what they were saying at first, but then the words became clearer, and my blood ran cold. They were talking about a body, about what to do with it. Fear gripped me as the realization hit. I wasn't alone, and whoever was out there was dangerous. I stood completely still, barely daring to breathe. Suddenly the voices stopped, as if they had sensed something was wrong. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened intently. The sound of footsteps grew louder, heading towards the restroom door, shadows flickering under the door, and I knew they were getting closer. In a desperate attempt to stay hidden, I curled my legs up and perched on the toilet seat, hoping the stall door would conceal me. My mind raced, thinking of my mom waiting in the car, oblivious to the danger. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was her. My mom was calling, but it didn't come at the right time. The sound was deafening in the silence, and I quickly silenced it, praying they hadn't heard. But it was too late. The footsteps stopped right outside my stall, and the handle rattled. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest as the door was pounded upon. A voice demanded I come out, the tone leaving no doubt about their intentions. I pressed my back against the door, using my weight to keep it shut, fear coursing through me. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. The banging on the stall door was relentless, each hit making me jump. I pressed my back against the door, trying to keep it shut. my mind racing with fear. "Open up!" a voice growled from outside. They weren't giving up. I could hear them moving around, their shoes scraping the floor. Suddenly the noise stopped. I dared to peek through a gap in the door and saw a shadow. Someone was climbing up the stall next to mine. A face appeared over the top, eyes wild. He leaned in, grabbing my hair and yanking me forward. I screamed, struggling to break free, but he was strong. The stall door flew open, and his accomplice stepped in. Just when I thought it was over, a piercing scream filled the air, cutting through the tension. It was my mom, her voice full of terror and urgency. The men froze, their grip loosening. In that split second, they exchanged a look, then bolted, their footsteps echoing as they ran. I collapsed, gasping for breath. My mom rushed in, pulling me into a tight hug. Tears streamed down my face as I clung to her, the terror slowly giving way to relief. Soon after my mom's scream, people rushed into the restroom to see what was happening. Someone quickly called 911. The police arrived within minutes, taking control of the chaotic scene. They took our statements, listening intently as I described the harrowing encounter. They then escorted us back to our car and followed us home to ensure we were safe. The next day, the news reported that the men who attacked me had fled in their car, but there was no evidence of a body. This left me with unsettling questions. Had they really been dragging a body, or was it just my imagination running wild at the moment? If so, what do they really want from me? These questions haunted me, making it hard to find peace. The terrifying encounter had left a mark, and the mystery of that night lingered, but one thing was clear. My mom's timely intervention had saved me, and for that, I was endlessly grateful. It happened 15 years ago, when I still worked in El Paso, near the Texas-Mexico border. The area was a melting pot of cultures, rich with history and tradition. But among the vibrant celebrations and everyday routines, there was an undercurrent of fear, a tale that the locals whispered about when the sun dipped below the horizon. They spoke of the bruja, a kind of vampire, as beautiful as she was deadly. She was said to lure men with her eyes, stealing the very essence of life from those she ensnared. As a police officer, I brushed off these stories as mere folklore. I believed in facts, in the tangible. Spirits, curses, and supernatural beings had no place in my world. But then, one day, right before our annual celebration, I saw her. Or at least, I thought I did. That fall, something disturbing began to unfold in El Paso. One by one, children were rushed to the hospital with strange symptoms. They had difficulty breathing, and their small bodies were marred with bruises and scratches, all appearing mysteriously overnight. The doctors were baffled, unable to pinpoint the cause of these sudden ailments. The situation took a darker turn when frantic parents started reporting sightings of a strange woman with long black hair in their children's rooms. Some even claimed to have heard her crying softly in the dead of night. Panic gripped the community as parents feared for their children's safety, imagining that the mysterious figure might visit their homes next. Very soon after, our station was inundated with reports and pleas for help. The fear was palpable, and it was our duty to investigate. We scoured the affected homes for clues, but came up empty-handed. Surveillance cameras captured no intruders, no strange occurrences. It was as if the mysterious woman existed only in the collective nightmares of the town. Frustration mounted as each lead turned cold, and the pressure to protect the community weighed heavily on us. Amidst this chaos, the legend of Bruja resurfaced, whispering more urgently among the townsfolk. To them, the vampire was real, and she had returned to exact her revenge. In our desperation, we turned to the elderly residents of El Paso, hoping to uncover any historical clues. They spoke of Bruja with a mixture of fear and reverence, recounting her tragic story. According to them, Bruja had been wronged by a man she loved, a betrayal that led her to curse his lineage. She was said to have taken the lives of his children in revenge, returning them only when they were on the brink of death. Though the story was told with great passion and conviction, we couldn't make it out. Yet, as the incidents continued without explanation, the line between myth and reality began to blur. Little did I know my skepticism was about to be shattered in the most terrifying way possible. That night, after finishing my shift, I was driving home with the story of Bruja swirling in my head. Her red eyes and flowing black hair haunted me, making the darkness around me feel alive. Suddenly, something darted across the road, forcing me to slam on the brakes. My heart pounded as I realized it was a coyote, its eyes glowing eerily in the headlights. For a moment we locked eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. As I tried to calm my racing heart, I rolled down the window to get some fresh air, and that's when I saw her. In the faint light, a woman in a white dress was approaching me, but she wasn't walking. She was gliding, almost floating. Her long black hair flowed like a river of darkness, and her figure seemed to wave like smoke in a breeze. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was frozen. She pressed her face against my window. Her eyes, though red, mesmerizing eyes, locked onto mine. I felt a strange compulsion to keep looking, unable to tear my gaze away. My mind fogged, and a cold dread seeped into my bones. A yipping sound echoed through the air, breaking the spell. I snapped back to reality, my heart racing. I fumbled for the keys, desperately trying to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Panic surged through me as the streetlights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced around the car. I grabbed my gun, my hands trembling, and pointed it into the darkness. But she was gone, leaving only fear hanging in the cold air. My breath came in ragged gasps, and sweat trickled down my back. Just when I thought it was over, a chilling touch brushed my shoulder. I spun around, and there she was, sitting in the back seat, her smile twisted and cruel. Blood dripped from her sharp fangs. She leaned in, her grip like a vice around my neck. "Why don't you come back? Why do you leave me alone?" Her voice was a cold whisper, each word seeping into my bones. "I don't know you. Get out of here," I shouted, struggling to free myself. But her voice grew louder, more insistent. "You cheated on me. You've got to live in hell." Desperation took over me as I pulled the trigger, and the bullet shattered the rear window, creating a web of cracks. The woman vanished, but her voice lingered, echoing in my head. The gunshot brought the neighborhood to life. Lights flickered on, and people rushed out to see what had happened. Someone called 911, and within minutes, my colleagues arrived. They found me shaking, barely able to speak. Soon after that, I was taken to the hospital, where I finally calmed down enough to tell them everything. The days that followed were a haze. I took time off and went to visit my wife and daughter in another state, needing to escape El Paso and the haunting memories. As I knocked on the door, my heart pounded with a mix of worry and hope. To my surprise, my wife opened the door, her face lighting up with a smile. She hugged me tightly, but something felt off. I pulled back and looked into her eyes. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a hint of red, and her smile seemed too wide, too sharp. A chill ran through me, and I wondered if Bruja's curse had followed me after all. That night, sleep was elusive. My mind was a battlefield of fear and guilt, and when I finally drifted off, the nightmares began. In the dream, I felt a cold touch on my cheek, a sensation so real it sent shivers down my spine. Bruja's voice whispered in my ear, her words like ice piercing my soul. "Why did you leave me alone?" she murmured, her voice dripping with malice. I sprang up in bed, heart racing, only to find my wife lying next to me, blood trickling from her mouth. Panic surged through me, and I cried out, pleading for Bruja's forgiveness, but her grip tightened around my neck, and I felt my breath slip away. Sweat poured down my face as I desperately called out for help. Suddenly, a soothing touch woke me up. I jolted awake to find my wife sitting beside me, her brown eyes comforting me. After collecting my composure, I held her hands in mine and began to confess my infidelity. I had seen someone else behind her back when I was in El Paso, and now it was time to face my mistake. The encounter with Bruja left an indelible mark on me. Though the physical wounds healed, the psychological scars remained. My return to El Paso was haunted by the memory of that night and the lingering fear that Bruja was still out there, watching me. The town, too, was forever changed. The stories of Bruja were no longer dismissed as mere legends, but were spoken of with hushed reverence. Parents kept a closer watch on their children, and the night seemed to hold more dangers than before. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that Bruja's curse had not been fully lifted. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her red, hypnotic gaze, and I heard her chilling voice echoing in my mind. The line between myth and reality had blurred irrevocably, leaving me to wonder if I would ever truly escape her sinister grasp. It was almost 2 in the morning, and after a wild night out at the club with my friends, I was finally heading home. The route took me near Fremont Street, known for its relentless energy and neon glow that turned the night into day. Even though the dazzling lights called out to me, I was too drained to stop and join the revelers. My bed and a hot shower were the only thing on my mind. I opted for a shortcut through a secluded road, hoping to shave some time off of my journey. The street was almost pitch black, punctuated by the occasional flickering streetlight. The silence was both unsettling and soothing, a stark departure from the chaos of the city I had just left behind. The quietness enveloped me, providing a much-needed escape from the night's excitement. As I drove deeper into the darkness, the neon buzz of Fremont Street faded away. The road became narrower, and the buildings gave way to empty lots and overgrown vegetation. The desolation was almost complete, broken only by the sound of my car's engine and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was as if I had crossed into another world, one that was still and eerie. Out of nowhere, my headlights caught a glimpse of a figure up ahead, a woman in a striking red dress, sitting alone on the steps outside of a building. Her head was bowed, and her long hair obscured her face, cascading over her back like a curtain. An inexplicable sense of dread washed over me, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe she needed help. I slowed down as I approached her, my heart beating faster with each passing second. The deserted road, the flickering lights, and the silent figure created an almost surreal scene. I rolled down my window, ready to offer help, all the while feeling an odd mix of fear and intrigue. I hesitated for a moment before calling out, "Hey, are you okay?" Slowly, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, streaked with tears that glistened in the dim light. Her eyes, filled with sadness, locked onto mine. There was something haunting about her gaze, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But I shrugged it off, thinking she might just have had a rough night. "Can you give me a ride?" she asked, her voice soft and trembling. I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, and despite the eerie atmosphere, I felt a surge of protectiveness. Maybe I could help her out, do a good deed. I smiled, trying to reassure her, and unlocked the passenger door. "Sure, hop in." She got into the car, her movements slow and deliberate. As she settled into the seat, I couldn't help but notice how the red dress clung to her figure, a striking contrast against her pale skin. I started the car and pulled back onto the road, stealing quick glances at her. We drove in silence for a few moments. I didn't want to pry, but curiosity gnawed at me. "What's your name?" I finally asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, staring straight ahead. "Lila. And you?" "I'm Alex," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "Where do you need to go, Lila?" She looked out the window, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of her hair. "Just keep driving. I'll tell you where to turn." There was something off about her, something that made me nervous, but I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the road. As we drove through the narrow streets, she gave me directions in a soft, almost detached voice. Left here, right there, straight ahead. The route seemed random, taking us through unfamiliar neighborhoods and increasingly run-down areas. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were going in circles. But I didn't question her. She must know where she's going, I thought. Finally, she directed me into a run-down area, the buildings looking more and more decrepit. "This is close enough," she said, suddenly. I pulled over, the car coming to a stop in front of a dilapidated building. I turned to her, about to ask if she was sure this was the right place, but the words caught in my throat. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty, and the door was still closed. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked around frantically. Had she gotten out without me noticing? I turned back to the front, my mind racing with confusion and fear. And then I saw her, standing in front of my car, illuminated by the headlights. I quickly regained my composure, convincing myself that she must have slipped out when I was looking around, then walked to the front of my car. I rolled down my window again, my voice trembling slightly. "Lila, are you okay? Do you need any more help?" She didn't respond or move, her high heels seemingly glued to the ground. I waited in silence. My skin crawled as I could feel the cold wind sweep through my clothes. Suddenly, she began to turn, but only her head moved. Her body remained perfectly still as her head slowly spun 180 degrees to face me, like a Barbie doll. I screamed, terror flooding my senses. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas, desperate to put as much distance between us as possible. My eyes were fixed on her, terrified that she might chase after my car. But she remained where she was, her head facing me with a twisted, eerie smile. My heart raced as I sped back towards Fremont Street. The terror began to ebb away.